Elias Monroe had always been the quiet shadow in the Monroe family empire, the one who stood at the edge of the boardroom table with a tablet in his hands while his father, Victor Monroe, and his two older brothers, Harrison and Cole, spoke loudly about deals, risks, and power. "Just run the numbers, Eli," Harrison would often say with a smirk, tapping the polished oak table. "Leave the real business to us." Elias would nod, his face calm, his voice soft. "The numbers tell the real story," he once replied gently, but no one listened. On the day the family gathered to discuss the rumored offer to buy their manufacturing company for $72 million, Elias sat near the window, watching sunlight bounce off the glass towers across the street. Victor leaned back in his chair and said, "The buyer wants to stay anonymous. Probably some hedge fund." Cole laughed. "As long as the money's real, I don't care who they are." Elias cleared his throat. "Maybe we should slow down. There are gaps in the proposal." Victor waved him off. "You worry too much, son. This is bigger than spreadsheets." Elias lowered his eyes, hiding the small smile that flickered across his face, because for the past 4 months, he had been preparing for a version of this moment no one else could imagine. Late at night, when the Monroe estate fell silent, Elias sat in a rented office across town, surrounded by blueprints, legal documents, and a single framed photo of his late mother, Maribel Monroe. "They never saw what you built," he whispered to the picture one evening, rubbing his tired eyes. His assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Talia Brooks, stepped into the room with 2 cups of coffee. "You're really going through with this?" she asked quietly. Elias took the cup, his hands steady. "They erased her from the story. They erased me. I'm just writing it back in." Over those months, Elias sold off small, overlooked assets through intermediaries, created a shell company called Silver Crown Ventures, and learned to become someone else. A voice coach helped him deepen his tone. A trainer helped him shed weight and change the way he walked. Even his reflection in the mirror began to feel like a stranger. One night, Talia watched him practice a new name. "Say it again," she said. Elias straightened his jacket and spoke in a firm, measured voice. "My name is Adrian Locke, CEO of Silver Crown Ventures." Talia raised an eyebrow. "You sound like you own the world." Elias exhaled slowly. "Soon I will." The day of the final negotiation arrived with a sky heavy with gray clouds, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Victor and his son sat confidently at the long conference table, whispering jokes about how they would spend their shares of the money. The door opened, and in walked a tall man in a dark suit, his hair neatly combed back, his expression unreadable. "Good morning," he said in a smooth, unfamiliar voice. "I'm Adrian Locke." Elias Monroe had entered the room as someone else. Cole leaned over to Harrison and muttered, "Doesn't look like a hedge fund guy." Adrian smiled politely. "We prefer to keep a low profile." Papers were spread across the table. Lawyers spoke in careful, measured tones. Victor glanced at Adrian and said, "So, Mr. Locke, what's your interest in a company like ours?" Adrian folded his hands. "Legacy," he replied. "Some things are worth more than profit." Elias felt his heart pound behind the calm mask. His father nodded, not realizing the weight of those words. As the meeting went on, Adrian asked sharp questions, catching small errors in the contracts. Harrison frowned. "You're thorough." Adrian tilted his head. "Details decide who wins and who loses." By the end of the meeting, Victor signed the final page, not noticing the legal clause that sealed the deal forever. The room was quiet after the last signature dried. Adrian stood, straightened his tie, and said softly, "Before I go, there's something you should know." Victor looked up. "What's that?" Adrian reached into his pocket and pulled out a familiar old watch, its leather strap worn from years of use. Victor's face went pale. "That was Maribel's," he whispered. Adrian met his eyes, his voice changing, losing the practiced tone. "It was my mother's," Elias said. Harrison shot to his feet. "What kind of sick joke is this?" Elias removed his glasses, his hands no longer shaking. "No joke. You just sold the company to your youngest son." Cole laughed nervously. "That's impossible." Elias slid a folder across the table. The indemnity clause. You signed away the right to challenge the buyer's identity. Victor's voice broke. Elias, listen, we can fix this. Elias shook his head. You had years to fix how you treated me, how you treated her. The weight of the room shifted, like a storm finally breaking. 2 weeks later, Elias sat alone in the same boardroom, now quiet in a different way. The chairs that once held his father and brothers were empty. Talia stood by the window, holding a stack of unopened letters. They keep sending these, she said. Elias took them, glanced at the familiar handwriting, and sighed. What do they say? Talia asked. Elias smiled sadly. Promises. Threats. Regrets. He walked to the small fireplace in the corner, lit a match, and dropped the letters in one by one, watching the words curl into ash. On the table lay another folder, this one containing his mother's original will, now public, now undeniable. Talia broke the silence. Do you feel better? Elias thought for a moment. I feel finished, he said. He looked out at the city, the lights beginning to glow as night fell. This company was built on someone's dreams. I'm just making sure it finally honors them. Talia nodded. So, what's next, Mr. Monroe? Elias straightened his jacket, a calm confidence settling over him. Now, he said softly, we build something they never believed I could. The news of the takeover spread through the company halls like a sudden windstorm, rattling desks, whispers, and long-held assumptions. Employees who once walked past Elias without a second glance now paused, unsure whether to smile or keep their heads down. In the break room, 2 analysts leaned close over their coffee. Did you hear? The quiet one owns almost everything now, one said. The other shook her head. I always thought he was just polite, not powerful. Elias moved through the building with slow, steady steps, greeting people by name, something his father had never bothered to do. Good morning, Mr. Hale, he said to the security guard, who nearly dropped his radio in surprise. In a small conference room, Talia laid out a plan. We need to reassure investors. They're nervous, she said. Elias nodded. Tell them the company is finally being run by someone who reads the fine print. He paused, then added, and someone who remembers the people who keep it running. The words felt simple, but they carried weight. For the first time, Elias felt the building breathe with him, not against him. Victor Monroe did not take his defeat quietly. One evening, Elias's phone rang, and his father's name glowed on the screen. Talia watched from across the desk as Elias answered. Elias, this has gone far enough, Victor said, his voice tight with anger and fear. You've embarrassed this family. Elias leaned back in his chair. You embarrassed it when you pretended my mother didn't matter, he replied calmly. There was a long silence. We can still make a deal, Victor finally said. Come home. We'll put your name back on the door. Elias closed his eyes for a moment. I don't want my name on a door. I want the truth on record. Victor slammed the phone down. Talia exhaled. That didn't go well. Elias gave a small smile. It went exactly how it needed to. The media storm arrived the next morning. Cameras crowded the front steps of the company building, reporters shouting questions into the air. Mr. Monroe, is it true your father altered a will? What do you say to accusations of corporate betrayal? Elias stepped forward, his voice steady. This is not about revenge, he said. It's about honoring the work and the vision of my mother, Maribel Monroe, and protecting the people who depend on this company. A young reporter asked softly, Do you still consider them your family? Elias hesitated, then answered, Family is built on trust. I hope one day we can find that again. Behind him, Talia whispered, That was perfect. Elias shook his head. It was honest. Inside the boardroom, the remaining board members gathered around the long table, their faces a mix of concern and curiosity. What's your first move? One asked. Elias stood, resting his hands on the table. We stopped chasing fast money, he said. We invest in our people and our product. Another member frowned. That's risky. Elias smiled faintly. So is ignoring the quiet ones in the room. Laughter broke the tension, soft but real. Talia passed around a new set of proposals, filled with training programs, fair wage plans, and research investments. "This is different," a board member admitted. Elias nodded. "Different is how we survive." That evening, Elias visited his mother's old workshop on the edge of the property, a place Victor had sealed off years ago. Dust covered the tables, and faded sketches still hung on the walls. Elias ran his fingers over one of the drawings. "You always saw more than they did," he murmured. Talia stood in the doorway. "You could turn this into something," she said. Elias looked around, imagining light, voices, movement. "I will," he replied. "This will be our innovation lab. Her name will be on the door." Talia smiled. "Maribel Lab. I like it." Elias felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in years. A letter arrived the next day, not angry, not threatening, but tired. It was from Harrison. Elias read it slowly. "I didn't know about the will," his brother had written. "I should have asked more questions. I should have listened." Elias folded the letter and sat quietly for a long time. Talia watched him. "Are you going to reply?" she asked. Elias nodded. "Not today," he said, "but someday." He placed the letter in a drawer, not with the ashes of the others, but somewhere safe. Weeks passed and the company began to change. Meetings started with open questions instead of orders. Employees shared ideas without fear of being laughed out of the room. In the cafeteria, Elias sat at a long table with engineers and interns, listening more than he spoke. "You really want to hear what we think?" a young intern asked. Elias smiled. "That's the whole point." The building felt brighter, not because of new lights, but because of new energy. Talia leaned over one day and whispered, "They believe in you." Elias replied softly, "I believe in them." One rainy afternoon, Victor appeared at the front desk, looking smaller than Elias remembered. The receptionist called up. "Mr. Monroe, your father is here." Elias closed his eyes, then said, "Send him up." In the office, they sat across from each other, the space between them filled with years of unspoken words. "You won," Victor said quietly. Elias shook his head. "I didn't want to win. I wanted to be seen." Victor looked down at his hands. "I should have seen you." The apology was simple, but it was real. Elias nodded. "I know." They stood, not as enemies, not quite as family, but something closer to peace. As the city prepared for the company's anniversary celebration, banners were hung with a new logo and a new motto, "Built on vision, grown by trust." Elias watched from the balcony as employees laughed and shared stories below. Talia joined him, handing him a glass of sparkling water. "You did this," she said. Elias shook his head. "We did this." Fireworks lit the sky, reflecting in the windows of the building. Elias thought of his mother, of the quiet boy he used to be, of the man he had become. The journey felt long, painful, and necessary. Late that night, after the crowd had gone and the lights dimmed, Elias returned to the boardroom one last time. He sat at the head of the table, not as a ruler, but as a guardian. On the wall hung a framed photo of Maribel Monroe, smiling gently. Elias spoke softly into the empty room. "We're going to do this, right?" He stood, turned off the lights, and walked out into the hallway where the future waited quietly, not as a challenge, but as an open door. The company, the legacy, and the story were no longer about proving anyone wrong. They were about building something honest, something lasting, and something worthy of being remembered. The following morning, Elias arrived early, long before the hum of elevators and ringing phones filled the air. The city outside the glass walls was just waking, pale sunlight stretching across rooftops like a promise. He poured himself a cup of coffee and stood by the window, thinking about how strange it felt to finally be at peace inside the very building that once made him feel invisible. Talia joined him, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. "You know," she said, handing him a folder, "people are already calling this the Monroe turnaround." Elias smiled faintly. "I'd rather they call it the Monroe beginning." He opened the folder to see letters from employees, handwritten notes thanking him for listening, for creating space where ideas could live. One line stood out. "You made us feel like we matter." Elias closed the folder and looked back at the city. "That's the only headline I care about," he said. News came later that day that investors who had once pulled away were slowly returning, drawn by the company's steady growth and clear direction. In the boardroom, a member said, "You've turned skepticism into confidence." Elias shook his head. Confidence grows when people are treated with respect. After the meeting, he walked through the factory floor, stopping to talk with workers as machines hummed around them. A technician wiped grease from her hands and laughed. "Never thought I'd see the boss down here." Elias replied, "This is where the real work happens." The technician nodded, and for a moment, the space between titles and people seemed to disappear. That evening, Elias found himself back at the Maribel lab, watching a group of young engineers test a new prototype inspired by one of his mother's old sketches. Sparks flew, laughter echoed, and the room felt alive in a way the boardroom never could. Talia leaned against the wall. "She would have loved this," she said softly. Elias swallowed, emotion rising in his chest. "I hope she knows," he replied. One of the engineers looked up. "Mr. Monroe, this design might change everything." Elias smiled. "Then let's make sure it changes things for the better." A message arrived on Elias's phone late that night. It was from Cole, short and simple. "I'm trying to be better. I don't know how yet, but I'm trying." Elias stared at the screen for a long time before typing back. "That's a start. Take care of yourself." He set the phone down, feeling a quiet shift inside him. The past no longer felt like a weight dragging behind him, but like a road that had led him here, to a place where forgiveness was possible, even if it wasn't complete. Months later, as the company celebrated the launch of its most successful product in decades, Elias stood on the stage, lights warm against his face, applause rolling through the hall. He looked out at the crowd, engineers, assistants, security guards, interns, board members, all standing together. "This company was once about power," he said into the microphone. "Now it's about people." The room fell quiet, then erupted in cheers. As Elias stepped back, he felt something settle inside him. Not victory, not revenge, but purpose. The story of the Monroe legacy no longer belonged to one family or one name. It belonged to everyone who believed that honesty, vision, and care could build something that would last far beyond any single lifetime. The morning after the celebration, Elias returned to his office to find a small, carefully wrapped box on his desk with no name attached. He opened it slowly, as if the past itself might rise out of it. Inside was his mother's old fountain pen, the one she used to sign early partnership contracts and sketch notes in the margins of her designs. A folded piece of paper rested beneath it, written in a familiar, uneven hand. "She always believed in you, even when we didn't." Elias closed his eyes, feeling a tightness in his chest that was not pain, but something closer to release. He placed the pen in the front pocket of his jacket. When Talia walked in, she noticed it immediately. "Looks like you've been given a symbol," she said. Elias nodded. "A reminder," he replied, "that this isn't just about what I build, but how I build it." As weeks passed, the company began reaching beyond its walls, partnering with local schools and small businesses, offering training programs and internships to young people who never imagined a place for themselves in a corporate world. Elias visited one of the classrooms, standing at the back as students presented their ideas. A nervous boy asked, "Do people like us really get a chance out there?" Elias stepped forward and smiled. "People like you are the future out there," he said. The teacher wiped her eyes, and the room filled with quiet pride. Outside, Talia whispered, "You've turned this into something bigger than a company." Elias looked at the students through the window. "My mother used to say success is what you leave behind for people you'll never meet." I think she was right. One late afternoon, Elias found Victor sitting alone on a bench outside the building, watching employees leave for the day. The old man looked tired, but calmer than before. Elias hesitated, then sat beside him. "They seem happy," Victor said softly. Elias nodded. "They are." Victor cleared his throat. "Your mother would be proud of this place now." Elias felt the words settle deep in his chest. I hope so, he replied. They sat in silence, not awkward, not warm, but honest. As Victor stood to leave, he placed a hand on Elias's shoulder for the first time in years. Take care of it, he said. Elias answered, I will. On a quiet night, long after the building had emptied, Elias walked through the halls one last time before heading home. The lights dimmed automatically behind him, shadows stretching and fading as he passed. He stopped in front of a glass wall that reflected his own image back at him, not the quiet boy, not the disguised stranger, but a man standing comfortably in his own truth. He took out his mother's pen and signed his name in the visitor's book by the door, slow and deliberate. Then he closed the book, turned off the final light, and stepped outside into the cool air. The city buzzed softly around him, alive and full of possibility. Elias Monroe walked forward, not chasing a legacy anymore, but living one, each step steady, each breath free. The story no longer about what he took, but about what he gave.